Hello and welcome to this video again. I am very pleased to have one of the most knowledgeable people on rock, especially hard rock, heavy metal, probably on the planet. And that is, of course, Mr. Martin Popoff. How are you, Martin?
Doing okay, Andy. Look forward to this one. Very cool.
Well, you see, over the years, being a British man and quite proud of our rock heritage with our, Led Zeppelins and Deep Purples and Rolling Stones and Beatles and all these bands we've got, I have championed our British rock bands. And recently I did a video where I thought, well, what are the good American rock bands? Of course, there's many, and but I don't feel like I'm enough as an authority to come up with the 10 greatest American rock bands and rank them. So I'm very pleased to have you there doing that job for me. So this is going to be a killer video, you see, and hopefully a lot of views, because and also maybe a few giant killers, because I have a feeling that the ones that are really great are not in the limelight. Well, we'll see. That's my theory, but let's see where we get. So did you have any problems pulling this together?
Well, yes. Yeah, so I have some notes here, and I've got lists that kind of are mixing in my own bias and then taking out my bias, and then it's like I love this British definition of rock, right? You over there kind of call hard rock kind of thing, or heavy metal rock, which is interesting. And I know you don't mean like this has to be all heavy metal. And then also I had a problem weaving in, because I know you want to talk about the 70s. I had a problem weaving in the fact that, okay, here's some bands that started in the 70s, but most of what they did is in the 80s. And I came to one really good insight about this as well. It's like, I mean, your point is so well taken when you did that exploratory episode of yourself on this, where it's like the British bands just blow the American bands away. Like, talk about punching above weight, right? I mean, the UK has a lot of weight. I think it's what's the population there? 68 million. It's pretty high, right?
Yeah, it's pretty crammed in. Yeah.
Yeah, and the States is like 330 million or something, right? So, Germany we know is big, but Germany is not an English-speaking country, so to speak. So it's you get a very squashed, smaller amount of bands there. But yeah, your point is really well taken. But I found I'll say the insight that I learned from this as well. Like, absolutely, for sure, the UK bands kill the American bands when it comes to the whole ranking. But what I noticed is that there is kind of a marked shift where a lot of these bands we're going to talk about today, their value went up in the 80s, while the UK bands' values
that's down. Interesting.
So there was an evening out that happened once you got to the 80s with some of these acts. But I don't know. Do you want me to start with my number 10?
Well, just go through what you're classing as these bands, because I'm assuming you haven't got like REM on there, have you, or anything like that?
No, because I did want to keep it. I did take that rule of because we batted a few ideas around, but I think I landed on, to do this list, rock and 70s.
70s rock, and
so these bands had to start in the 70s at least, kind of thing. So,
and be a rock band.
Number 10, I had this band, Kiss. Important band. I feel bad even putting them down this low, because honestly, I look at this list. This is the most talked about band of everybody on this list. The most still has legs band, where they're always in the news and people are always doing video shows on them. It's really quite bizarre. And actually, I'm looking at my list right now. I would say all other 9 bands on this list are somewhat forgotten. But this band is not forgotten. I mean, every single time we do a show on Kiss, it gets good numbers. I'm doing Kiss books all the time. It's definitely a big band, and I understand all your criticisms of them.
Can you explain it to me then? What's so great about Kiss? Is it? It's definitely an American thing, because I don't think when I was a kid, nobody was really into Kiss. There was a comic called Looking, which was for kids. And they had like a comic strip, I think, and Kiss were in there quite a lot, and that's how I noticed them. And I had posters of Kiss on the wall, but I never had any of the albums. I thought they looked amazing, but when I heard them, I just didn't. They just compared to Scorpions or Judas Priest or whatever I was into. They didn't even figure.
Yeah.
You know, I had a bit of time trying to find an album and just gave up. You know.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. Yeah, you're right. They are not a pronounced massive UK presence, really, right?
Yeah.
But let's start with this. So Prolific, album in 74, album in 74 again, album in 75, a live album in 75, an album in 76, another album in 76, Love Gun in 77, a double live album with One Side Studio, this one in 77, late 77, and then they do 4 solo albums in 78, and then they put out Dynasty in 79. So very prolific. Now, the other thing is, you know, I remember we talked a little bit about this, about the idea of simple songwriting, right? We call Tom Petty and Billy Joel and Fleetwood Mac and the Eagles geniuses when they do simple songwriting, and we call Kiss stupid when they do simple songwriting, right? But I don't really see a big difference between Kiss and Slade and BTO and other simple songwriting type bands. And then, but I also will make that reach and say, well, you know, if Tom Petty's allowed to do this and he's critically acclaimed, why can't Kiss write simple, stupid songs and be critically acclaimed, right? So you know, we do get into that Platonic ideal of what is good songwriting. It's a very abstract, it's a airy, rarefied sort of thing, right? So we don't have to put Kiss down for making these primary colored, crayon colored songs, right? And obviously, we also have to give them credit for the amount of fame, the amount of pervasiveness, you know, going out and doing interviews, packing a lunch and going to work every day. And also, we have to give them credit for elevating the idea of the stage show, a lot of innovations there, and just a lot of, you know, giving people value for their money kind of thing. You know, as I say these things, I think of, I really enjoyed doing, every once in a while, I would do these articles for Goldmine where I really laid out in point form, concrete, boom, 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 why a certain band should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I remember doing that for Deep Purple, Yes, Rush. But that's kind of the way I approach this exercise. It's like, what are all the things that make you great? It doesn't have to be just, you know, just the absolute, well, the prog or fusion virtuosity of a band or the virtuosity of the individual players. It's a package, right? So I started with Kiss. Number 9, do you want me to keep going?
Well, another thing I'd like to ask you is that the fact that they're quite simple, is it like a very big stepping stone band in America to rock? So they kids love them, and I loved them when I was real kids. So you get that, and then you like it, and you buy a guitar, and then the fact that it's not Led Zeppelin, you're not trying to learn Kashmir or, you know, Speed King or something. You're trying to learn a Kiss song, which is mid-tempo, and the riffs are pretty straightforward. Do you think that was another aspect that for Americans it's a very sort of a little bit like Status Quo is here, or, you know, for us it was AC/DC, really, to be honest. AC/DC was another band that you could
that's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. You know, if you're the right age, you get into them young, but generally speaking, you know, people stuck with them, and you know, maybe not through the poppy albums, but they're back in the 80s, and you know, Kiss was always in these people's lives. But I will tell you this, you know, talking to lots and lots of rock stars over the years, I would say without a doubt, Kiss is the band I hear cited the second most as being an inspiration.
Yeah, this is I've heard this.
Yeah, after the Beatles, right, and very close to Zeppelin. It's those three, right?
I've got
big inspirations on people who became rock stars, right?
I've got a friend who was originally from Los Angeles called Bobby Arechiga, and he was Mark Stein's drummer in the 80s, and then he formed a band called Strongheart, which were signed up by the Vander brothers, and so he came up in Los Angeles in the 1980s, and he cites.
There, Andy.
Yeah, pardon?
Oh, hang on, that might be me.
Have I gone? Have I?
No, you're here.
Oh, that's good. And he, you know, Peter Criss is an influence, and you know, those he plays concert toms, so he's just got single-headed toms like Phil Collins, and there's that Barkey Barky Tom sound, and so he would. This is one of the great drummers, you know, and it's you know, being British, I just don't. We never had it. We didn't.
Yeah, I don't think people would say he's one of the great drummers, or even he's an influence for that reason. He's an influence because he looked cool. The band looked cool. It was simple. It was a total gateway in for a musician of a certain age.
Yeah.
Right? So if you were 10 or 11, 12 years old, you know, getting into Kiss around Destroyer in 76 or something like that, sure. And also the idea of we would see him in like drum endorsement ads for Pearl and stuff. Like, I think he was a big booster of Pearl. When I met Peter, you know, I showed him my receipt, you know, from 1981. Hey, I went and bought a Pearl set because of you, right? Kind of thing. And so that was big as well. And I remember, learning those songs is easy. That's always a cool game. Even Neil Peart's kind of like that as well. Not, right. I mean, Neil Peart's on a much higher level, but it was still a level that you could attain. You could get through all those parts, right? And that really spurred you on to stick with it, right?
What would be the album to get if you're only going to have one Kiss album? What would it be?
Yeah, you know, that's always a tough one because I always when I hear that question, I go, well, do you want to start at the top? Do you want to start at the middle? If you give them the best one, are they going to be disappointed with everything they go after? My favorite album by them is Destroyer, but they have so many different eras to the band. You know, they, believe it or not, I mean, they more or less led the hair metal scene. Even
but that was a bit I remember 70s. More actually in the UK. And is it Creatures in the Night, the one with I Love It Loud? I Love It Loud. I absolutely love that album's incredible. It's partly the drum sound on there.
Yeah.
That's a great album. And The Elder I like.
Right.
Yeah, The Elder's strange and weird and proggy, and you go, I respect them for it. And there's some great moments on that. But so those are the two albums I would have. But I suppose for most people, it'd be Alive, wouldn't it? The first live album. That's supposed to be one of the great rock live albums.
Yeah, we always discount live albums, right? Because they are, you know, they're cheating, right? They're and I did a podcast episode of my History in 5 Songs thing where I went through what are the heaviest albums of the 70s, and Alive actually went way up the list. I was quite surprised. It's a very heavy album for the 70s and one of the heavier live albums. So that was cool, but brilliant. So
we go to number 9 then.
Number 9, I had Ted Nugent, this guy, right?
I love him.
There we go. How does that work? There we go. And there's my my sheet music version of of this album. So Ted, I wanted to put him in. I totally consider him a band because I had that same issue you had with you talk about Bruce Springsteen, do you talk about Frank Zappa? Is it allowed? I think Ted Nugent, you know, us as kids, they were always a band, right? They were literally just like Kiss and Aerosmith sort of thing. I consider it a band. You know, the main lead vocalist was Derek St. Holmes and whatnot. So, you know, Ted, he arrives through the Amboy Dukes. He's got albums in the early 70s. He's got 2 almost like proto versions of the Ted Nugent 75 album in Call of the Wild and Tooth, Fang and Claw, 73, 74. But he arrives with Ted Nugent. First big concert I ever saw was Ted Nugent, Rex, and Bebop Deluxe in Spokane, Washington in 76 on the Free For All tour. So he comes out with Free For All. Cat Scratch Fever does really well. You know, he sold a lot of records. He was a massive star in the States. He was playing all the hockey barns, right? But he does Cat Scratch Fever. Weekend Warriors does well. Double Live Gonzo does well. You know, he gets a bit of a dip in quality, but he's still got State of Shock in him so he's very prolific, huge star on the cover of all sorts of magazines. People love him. And it's one level up from Kiss. It's essentially a thinking man's version of Kiss when it comes to the songs, right? The riffs are a little more complicated. There's quite a bit more variety. But still a modest act. I mean, here we got Kiss and Ted Nugent at 9 and 10. And like I say, I've got a list in front of me of all the British bands, and they're like way up this list, beyond all these bands, right?
But I don't think any of the British bands really had that sting in the guitar sound. There's a certain type of riffage that Nugent does, which no other band really does. It's really stingy and in your face. The vocal is like that, the subject matters like that. And I always, when I was a kid, I noticed that he was playing a hollow body, almost like a jazz guitar, and yet he had this unbelievable guitar sound, which was so aggressive. It was almost like punky in its sound. I always thought that he had a very punk edge to him, which of course
a lot of that comes down to Tom Werman producing those albums, and Tom Werman really stressed the mid range.
Yeah,
he wanted the guitars to be like quote unquote like a locomotive, but that really made the rhythm section thin. And Cliff Davies on drums was not very adventuresome really at all. So yeah, it was all about the guitars and these not very good Tom Werman productions. They remind me of like the Alice Cooper Band productions of Bob Ezrin at the time. They're very mid-range and blocky. But we are talking late 70s. I mean, the British bands, Sting in the guitar. I mean, the British band's glory days, I think, are weighted a little more. Well, it's all the 70s, but weighted a little more to the early 70s. So it's hard to compare guitar sounds and stuff. But I mean, these bands are pop compared to what the British bands are doing at the time. The British bands are Latin and Gothic and classical based and doomy and proggy. Ted Nugent is not that. Ted Nugent, like I say, is literally one level up towards heavy metal from Kiss, but they're both very poppy.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Do you want to move on to number 8?
Sure. Number 8, I had Heart. And this is an 80s album. This happens to be my favorite album. I thought I'd take it out, but Heart also was a massive band. They're considered a pretty good band. People, critically acclaimed, right? You've got your Dreamboat Annie and your Magazine and your Little Queen. I guess there's not that much. Dog and Butterfly. Actually, Baby Strange, I think is 79, might be 80. But anyways, big band. Somewhat Zeppelin-esque, but somewhat poppy, folky. Could do a little bit of hard rock, but I was surprised kind of to put them in here because like your episode, I was grasping at straws.
Yeah, this is the point I want to get across.
I know it's so true. It's so true. So I've got all sorts of honorable mentions here lower than these bands, and now we're getting into like there's a few bands in my honorable mentions that I like more than Heart, and that would be like the Tubes for sure, Cheap Trick for sure. Yeah. Even MC5 and Stooges and stuff like that. But no, I'm trying to be sober and level-headed about this and say what are the quote unquote great bands. So yeah, Heart at number 8.
But the other thing with Heart is that when I was young, I really liked those first few albums. I thought they were really gutsy, like say Zeppy, but they were also more gutsy, a bit acousticy, and the vocals were great on them. And then you get into the 80s, and then they suddenly go massive, like Kiss. I mean, Kiss were like as big in the 80s as they were in the 70s, in that middle period where they just owned MTV. And Heart were a little bit like that. And I didn't get any of that 80s stuff that Heart were doing at all. It was almost like Fleetwood Mac or something like that.
Heart was twice as big as Kiss in the 70s, at least for record sales. And not for hype, and not for being in magazines, but Heart was probably about 4 times as big as Kiss in the 80s. Heart was massive, right? Yeah. So they had some really big albums there, like Heart, Brigade. I don't know what's the other one called, but yeah, and they got really egregiously hair metally. For a pop band, for a classic rock / pop band, they got really hair metally, right? They broke. They had every travesty going. Bad production, bad image, outside songwriters, all that stuff, right?
Yeah. The full Aerosmith.
Yeah. All right. I don't have a prop for my next one, but next one I went with Steely Dan, and I know you talked about them as well. And it's now we're getting into those sorts of bands where this is a band that I've listened to regularly throughout my life, but I never think of them as one of my favorite bands of all time. But we have to sitting in your leather burgundy chair in your library with your snifter of brandy, you have to say that this is a good band, and they everybody's going to think of them as a serious band and one of the great bands of all time when they are a band, sort of thing. But they're prolific. They had a lot of albums in the 70s, and they also were very successful. So yeah, Steely Dan at whatever we're at, number 7.
Yeah, last night I went to bed and I can't remember what I put on. I think it was Gong. I was listening to Gong, and I fell asleep, and it must have run for hours. And when I woke up, it was playing a track off Katie Lied by Steely Dan. And I still had the headphones on, and I remember this song crept into my ears, and I thought, what's this horrible song? And the reason why I thought it was horrible, it seemed to sound. This is my initial intention. It was like before I sort of it was really weird to hear Steely Dan like this. I thought it was like a weak rock band in the background with terrible singing, and that was the thing. I went, what's this band with terrible singing on it? This whiny, like, can't pitch voice. And then when I realized, oh my God, it's Steely Dan. And then suddenly it all became always cool riffs and cool that and this and all these guitars. Yeah. But I don't know. I've always had a bit of a mistrust of Steely Dan. I don't know how to explain it. That I always feel like I'm being a little bit conned by them.
It's interesting.
They are the definition of overrated. They're a good band. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. They seem to be worshipped, and people think they're very clever. But they seem like college boys to me. I can't explain it, and it's the voice. Okay, well, I think if they had a great voice, I think they'd be seen as being lesser.
Well, we have to grant that they are clever, and we also have to grant
they are clever.
That, nobody else ever sounded like them. They do have a very unique, bizarre sound, right? So that's kind of cool when you can do that, right?
Yeah, and they had a whole ton of hit records with very sophisticated, subject matter and playing, and I know there's a whole ton of people in America that once they'd moved from Kiss, then they got into Steely Dan, and then they got to learn a Steely Dan, like a Larry Colton guitar solo or something for a wedding gig, and then they're like. It's like going to college. I understand all that. And I think that's the place that they have. I think if you're going to argue for them artistically, it's a sort of that nostalgic beatnik approach to their lyrics that they've got,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, next I had this problematic band, Aerosmith,
yes.
Right? Yeah. So Aerosmith considered America's greatest rock and roll band. That was one of the tags that applied to them, America's version of the Rolling Stones. And when I did my greatest bands of all time, History in 5 Songs audio podcast episode, I came to the conclusion that the greatest band of all time was the Rolling Stones. That's who I picked, right? And I won't go into that whole thing, but so these guys are very compared to the Stones, and I know what you say. I like your takedown of them in a way where you start dismissing even some of their great albums, and we all went, and then I sort of stood back and go, well, yeah, I've never thought Aerosmith was that great an album. Every time I listen to Draw the Line, I'm kind of disappointed. But I think Get Your Wings is a really good album. Toys in the Attic, I think, is close to a masterpiece, and this absolutely is a masterpiece. This is as good as any Led Zeppelin album.
Yeah, what tracks are on that one? Because I get Rocks and Toys in the Attic, because they're the two.
Well, it kicks off with Back in the Saddle. Then we get Last Child, 2 of my least favorite songs on the album. Rats in the Cellar, very highly technical, complicated, super interesting metal. I also did a podcast episode recently called The Guitar Weave, right? And, there I talked about the New York Dolls, the Stones, Grateful Dead, but I did talk about Whitford and Perry, and you get some neat guitar weave stuff out of Aerosmith as well. Combination is another super cerebral, interesting riff, and the way the switchbacks work and everything. It's absolutely as artistic a song as anything Zeppelin ever did. To me, the height of Zeppelin is Celebration Day. Or Friends, right?
Yeah,
or My Time of Dying, or Kashmir. Combinations up with those songs. Sick as a Dog. Now we get to side 2. Sick as a Dog is literally in my top 5 songs of all time by anybody. It is just so brilliantly, beautifully put together. And if you don't buy that, compare it to any Rolling Stones song, and it's like the best Rolling Stones song ever written. Nobody's Fault is super complicated, interesting metal again. Get the Lead Out, not so great. Licking a Promise, super explosive, cool Rolling Stones, New York Dolls type. Beautiful production on this as well. And then you close with Home Tonight, which is almost like the prototype of the proper good quality power ballad. So yeah, everybody loves this album. This album affected a lot of people. I talked to Nikki Sixx. Nikki Sixx says this is his favorite album of all time. I've heard a few people say that about Rocks, but still, Toys in the Attic is now 9 times platinum, if you can believe it. And like I say, Get Your Wings has got some classic. Aerosmith is a good garagey, stonesy sort of album. So huge band, big band through the 70s. But though most of those albums didn't go, I don't think multi-platinum in the 70s. They were still, at this kind of level that Aerosmith and Ted Nugent and even Blue Oyster Cult were at, where the record sales weren't massive, but they were all touring around and playing all the hockey barns and stuff. So they're just as big as you can get, more or less, for a 70s band in America. So yeah, right in the middle of the pack, I've got Aerosmith. It's a little lower than I even thought they would be.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you compare them to the Stones, when they're at their best, they're way better than the Stones. That's what I feel. That's the first thing. I think that Sweet Emotion is one of the greatest rock songs ever written. It's unbelievable, and I can't think of any other rock band that sounds like that, because it's trippy and weird and it's funky and the riffs are cool and the way it starts off is just, the sound is amazing. And I heard that on a compilation album called Axe Attack that came out, and that was really important to British people in 1980, I'll tell you that. So I went out, I'm like, oh my God, this is the best. I thought that was the best song on Axe Attack, Sweet Emotion. So I went and got the albums and started listing my mates' albums, and I couldn't find any other track that was quite like that. So what I found is, even on the classic albums, it's all up and down. Yeah. And so, but you get those classic mid-70s albums. I think they're most, for me, the album that I loved virtually every track on was actually Permanent Vacation, believe it or not. I think they came, that was a great album full of great songs, but they got the ghostwriters in at that point.
Yes,
they had, hadn't they?
I was thinking about that. Yeah, I was thinking about that as well. But the problem with Aerosmith, unfortunately, it's a tragic problem, and it's very much like Def Leppard. Those two bands get compared all the time. But, Aerosmith's got, I think it's 5 albums in the 70s, 4 in the 80s. I think we're down to 2 in the 90s. Hang on, 1, 2, maybe just 3 in the 90s, and then 1 in the 2000s, I think. Right at the beginning, just push play, and then 1 in the 2010s. So they peter right out, and the quality goes down.
Goes right down, yeah.
Those later albums. But you're right. Permanent Vacation, I think, is good. Pump is good. Even Done with Mirrors is pretty good. And then the first one of the 80s is really good. Rockin' a Hard Place. Everybody likes that album.
And all those albums have apps. They all have, I mean, Love in an Elevator, all the hit records. But I love things like Ragdoll and the track Permanent. There's loads of really great songs with Aerosmith. But I don't know if they think there's like a Led Zepp 4 or Deep Purple in rock there, or Sabotage. There's just not that there, is it? With Aerosmith,
I think most people would say Rocks gets there, right? Yeah. I think Rocks gets there. By the way, I also did a podcast episode on the greatest songs of all time, and I just said that about Sick as a Dog. But Draw the Line, I have sometimes called the greatest song of all time. And it's definitely in my top 3, probably.
Yeah.
And I like the way that song reminds me of Celebration Day with the weird little offset, strange riff to it. So you're right. I mean, most of the albums have some absolute classic bangers on them as well.
You think if they called it a day at the end of the 70s, when they went into that horrendous dip in the early 80s, do you think if they called it a day, we'd be thinking of them more highly?
Oh yeah, that's amazing. Pete and I once did an episode if the world ended on January 1st, 1980, one of the greatest bands of all time, right? And there we talked about bands like Sabbath and Rush, and I always talk about these bands that don't stick around long enough to screw up, like The Police, Soundgarden, Max Webster, Gillan, all these bands with 6 or 5 albums, right? Sort of thing, right? But you're right. Yeah. Aerosmith. I mean, and just the whole look and presentation and danger of that band on stage. I mean,
I've got to say, Steven Tyler as a singer, unbelievable. As a front man, when you're watching him moving around the stage, absolutely incredible. Joe Perry is a guitar hero, absolutely almost like the prototype guitar hero. You put them Page and you put Keith Richards, put them all together, a bit of Hendrix, and you've got him. And then Joey Kramer is one of the great rock drummers of all time. Absolutely, like Phil Rudd level of being able to play a straight rock beat, and it's a work of art. I mean, I saw him live, and that's what impressed me. And a lot of time, he wasn't even playing the hi-hat; it was like bogga, just like that, and he was just incredible. And they're a formidable band, without a doubt. But there's I just don't feel that they just don't quite. When I thought about this list, they were the first contenders. So, well, it's Aerosmith, isn't it? They're the greatest American rock band.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and they sort of are in a way.
Down slowly, yeah.
And then you knock them down,
yeah. Interesting, yeah. Same sort of deal. Yeah. All right, my next one is Little Feat.
Little Feat, yes.
This is a later album, but I really think this band. I saw them live in just not long. Well, I don't know, 20 years ago. It was one of the great live shows I've ever seen. And, I've got a stack of CDs from the 2000s and 90s, which are almost my favorite Little Feat albums. They're that good even now, right? And then, of course, the early stuff is amazing. And even this 80s stuff is really good. And they're a band also that, I'm never going to put the Eagles on this list or Pure Prairie League or Poco or any of those bands, right? But this is smart enough and interesting enough, and the Richie Hayward and the polyrhythms and the and just the Lowell George and the almost Steely Dan level lyrical stuff that they do. The question is, what are the great American bands? And I think this is a band that most people revere, right? Critics revere them. Everybody thinks they're really good. I don't think they're overrated in any form, because a lot of people don't talk about them at all. And I don't think they had, how did that work? I don't believe they have a single gold album certified in the States, period. But yeah, absolutely legendary. People know that stuff. We get the tragic death of Lowell George as well, heroin, right? Just all around a great band. They've got enough of that. People often think they're from the South, or think of them as a Southern rock band. And I can see, if they were from the South, you could squarely just throw them in, right, with the Allman Brothers, but they are a California band. I just, all of that Avocado Mafia, Troubadour, California rock thing, I find severely overrated. It bores me to tears. I think they got terrible drummers, terrible productions, everything, right? But so when you get a smart one like this,
they're a hell of a band.
Something to cherish, right? So
they're a hell of a band, and it's like, the comparison to Steely Dan is interesting, because they are revered by critics. The people who love Little Feat like people who love Steely Dan, but Little Feat haven't grabbed that sort of more cultural weight that Little Feat have never grabbed it. And I'm always like, why Steely Dan and not Little Feat? Or early Chicago, for example, with the Terry Kath era Chicago. This is all your sort of sophisticated rock, and I don't quite get that, and I think they groove. There's a groove there that is unique.
It's completely commercial. There's no reason. There's no good reason why they didn't have massive hits. 3 hits every single album, right?
Yeah. It's weird, isn't it?
Yeah. All right. I don't have a prop for my next one, but now we're up to number 4. I'm going with Grateful Dead, who you talked about as well, right? I think this is a band absolutely prolific all through the 70s. Rapid changes, a lot of lineup changes as well. Big live albums. Incredibly huge, phenomenon when it comes to the live show, and the Deadheads following them around. I think they're a super unique sounding band. Nobody sounds like them. I included them actually in my Guitar Weave episode. So I talked about how how Jerry Garcia and Bob Weir weave. I'm more a big fan of the whole Keith and Donna years. I really like Shakedown Street and Terrapin Station, and some to some extent goes to heaven, go to heaven. But yeah, just a massive band. I think that uniqueness matters. The absolute, cultural penetration of the band matters. And the cerebral quality of how they arrive at this playing, and how they they've got the jazziness, they've got the deep understanding and appreciation for the whole folk boom before the blues. They know all that stuff. Half the time when they put out a live album, it's full of covers. Jerry Garcia band is notorious for that. But yeah, I think you have to include them as one of the great bands. And the funny thing is, this is a band, and Little Feat and Steely Dan, come to think of it. Actually, most of these bands, you can't even compare them to British bands. They just have nothing in common with any of the British bands, which is kind of funny, right?
That's definitely the key. That's definitely the key to American rock bands. I have a real. I mean, when I was young, I read about Grateful Dead, and I thought, my God, this is going to be the best band in the world. And I went and got Dark Star, and I absolutely hated it. And as I said on the channel before, it does sound like a stone country band tuning up to me. But with everybody pushing back, which they will, and they have pushed back, and I love it because I've gone and checked out. And now I'm starting to get into certain albums. Terrapin Station, I heard that. I thought, why doesn't anyone go on about this? Is this like one of the? I mean, there's not that many great prog albums, American prog albums. Terrapin Station could well be the greatest American prog album. It's incredible. And then I've just discovered Blues for Allah this week. Because there's so many albums to pick, and I put that on, and I thought, oh my God, this has got a jazziness. It's like jazz fusion, but nothing like any other jazz fusion band. It's like they've got their own jazz fusion, which I can hear almost like it's, say, King Gizzard and the Electric Wizard, this band that everyone keeps going on about now. I'm like, so yeah, I'm starting to get it. I'm starting to get the Grateful Dead, which is Andy, a great thing.
I hate when people tell me to go listen to music, but I'll do it just once with you here, and only with one song. I mean, I included the song France on my greatest songs of all time, greatest 5 songs of all time. Go listen to France. It's a short Grateful Dead song. It's either on Shakedown Street or Terrapin Station, but that is an absolute masterpiece of everything you're saying here. It's proggy, but it is so lusciously poppy and sophisticated melodically and stuff. That one song. But what else was I going to say about the Dead? But I can't remember. But yeah, absolutely. I think they belong on this list of
without a doubt. Yeah, I think that's it's great. I love to get a statement about as many bands on the channel as I can, because we have all our own biases, and I've become very aware that I made a decision about bands usually when I was about 14 years old. Kiss is that, Steely Dan is that. I've got all these decisions, and I almost find it funny now that I know when I'm criticizing a band that it's that prejudice I've got, because I was into Angel Witch, or then I was into the Mavish Nooks, or whatever it was in that was colouring my opinion. It's like I used to hate ELP because I bought an ELP album when I was young, and I thought it was the best album I had ever heard. And then following week, I got a Mavish Nooks album, and ELP just got on the wrong side of it, because I was going, what's the point in bloody ELP when they got this, And then more recently, I've gone back to them and thought this is one of the greatest prog bands of all time. So this is part of the process. And so the fact you're saying odd songs like this, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people checking these out. I might even do a playlist of it. So we've got some of them you can click down below. But yeah, it's very interesting. Love to have Grateful Dead on. Yep.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. France, I picked that as one of the greatest songs ever written, but I did a bunch of research on what the actual Grateful Dead fans think, and France is way at the bottom of the list. There's a visceral hate of that song that I just do not understand. I think it has to do with the fact that it is the Keith and Donna years, and Donna is singing on it, right? But generally speaking, they'll go to songs from the very last 2 albums they ever made, because they're getting even more commercial, like the Brent Midland years. But yeah, I think that thing is an absolute genius song, and it's only 3 minutes and something. It's just so incredibly put together, and it's just really, really interesting song. So, all right, my next choice, number 3, I went with Van Halen, which you've talked about, and you understand the greatness of Van Halen. I have a little asterisk by it because they only had 2 albums in the 70s. They're barely a 70s.
Yeah.
They had a 78.
But the thing is, those 2 albums, didn't that just save hard rock, heavy rock, whatever you want to call it? Didn't it just save at that point? Especially in America. Yeah. I mean, it's like, would there have been hair metal? Would there have been that commercial space if Van Halen hadn't brought those albums and sold millions and millions on what was really early 70s hard rock, but just amped up in every way, shape, and form? Yeah,
exactly. So Van Halen 1 comes out the very same day as Judas Priest's Stained Class, which I always found interesting. But Aerosmith's on the decline. A crappy live album in 78. Kiss is on the decline. You got the 4 solo albums. Ted Nugent's on the decline. He's going towards his divorce, and basically Weekend Warriors is it's okay. I mean, it does well, but it's not that great. But yeah, Stars is going away. Derringer, Moxie in Canada isn't doing so great.
Angel
is getting poppy. So what's happening in 78 is you get punk becoming new wave, and you get this bridge band with this amazing album that everybody's talking about, Van Halen 1. And then Van Halen 2 comes the next year in 79. And you're right. It's like, if you want to talk about, what are the actual biggest, most substantial roots of hair metal, it's Van Halen is the first band you think of. Then weirdly, Motley Crue arrives a little early. So you got to include them, and you got to include Aerosmith. And so that's basic your stepping stones. But Van Halen is the big one, because hair metal arrives in 83. Van Halen is already the number 1 choice for setting this whole thing up, but they also put out an album in 80, in 81, in 82, and in 83, I think, right? So like they're almost like the Maiden bulldozing their way through the new wave of British heavy metal. Van Halen is bulldozing their way into creating the blueprint for hair metal by being so prolific, with that batch of David Lee Roth albums. So now, why are they the greatest? I mean, they deserve to be up there because they have this explosive Who-like personality. They have all this personality that's coming from all 4 corners of the band. Everybody's unique and bringing different things to it. It's chaos. It's lightning in a bottle. It's not chaos on the debut. The debut, I always say, is the most conservative and sober and ambitious album they ever made. But by the time you get to this, it's chaos all day, every day, right? This is just like,
you're right there.
This is like 4 Keith Moons playing, right? And Women and Children First is even worse, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so they are an amazing, amazing band. You get literally, when I talk about the idea of who are the guitar heroes of the world right now, I mean, 1 and 2, there's kind of like no debate. It goes Jimi Hendrix, Eddie Van Halen, and then everything else is up for debate. It's like a big drop, and then there's a big pile of guys that people jockey around, but nobody leaves Eddie Van Halen out of like the number 2 slot.
Yeah,
I don't think. So yeah, an amazing band, great front man, all that stuff. Very prolific, making all these albums. They're short albums. They will write in every direction. They don't care. But most of it's pretty hard rock. People love them immediately. They're great live. They got a great drummer. The bass player is really cool, and he's got the high vocals. And we've got literally, a Robert Plant or an Ian Gillan on steroids with David Lee Roth kind of thing. So I think they definitely, just on the merit of that abstractness of like 4 sweaty dudes with a lot of talent, just making pure rock and roll. I think they have to be one of the greatest.
Yeah, Alex Van Halen is also one of the greatest rock drummers of all time. And when I was coming up and we were like tracking that double bass drum thing, that starts off with like sort of Ginger Baker, and they've all got double bass drums in the early 70s, but then nobody ever uses them. You can't hear it, and then you start to hear it creeping in. But with when Alex came on the scene, you start to see that more and more, and he's using that more and more, and he's got a very distinctive sound. So of American rock drummers, he was possibly, for me, the most influential drummer on on me. I think Michael Anthony doesn't get his just desserts because that bass sound. I mean, when you put the first album on, it's Michael Anthony you hear first, isn't it? It was dong dong, and then the vocal harmonies. I think gave them. They could be really really heavy. Like there's elements of thrash metal are just emerging, isn't there? In like loss of control and stuff like that. But they also have these beautiful vocal harmonies, which seem to be able to make it multi-million selling. And then, of course, Dave Lee Roth, one of the greatest frontmen of all time. Who's better?
Yeah,
who's better? He's incredible.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
I
mean, as I hope I didn't say this when we talked last time, because we went all over the place with that one. But, I remember thinking when we first heard Van Halen and first put it on the first album, it was the only band where there were like a good 4 to 5 songs on that album that were as good as any European heavy metal, right? It was just so absolutely incredibly well done. And it's that thing like ask Queen to do a heavy metal song, they'll do it better than anybody else. They just don't want to do it very often. And so Van Halen was a little bit like that. I mean, they did it much more often. But
that first album, every single track is brilliant. It's like, that's the thing, it does knock you out. I can remember when I first heard Van Halen 1, and it's like they keep amping it up, and it's like you get Running with the Devil and go, well, that's great, but there's no real guitar solo there. They tease you. Then you get Eruption, and it's like, well, that's that. Then you get the Kinks, which is basically the beginning of the whole thing. And then they think Jamie's Crying's poppy, Ain't Talking About Love is really heavy. They got the blues, Ice Cream Man. Ice Cream Man was the first Van Halen tune I ever heard that on the radio. I thought it was Blue Oyster Cult, and it took me a long time to work out it wasn't, after buying a lot of Blue Oyster Cult albums, which haven't cropped up yet. They haven't cropped up on the list, have they?
Well, funny you should say that, because we're at number 2, and I'm going with Blue Oyster Cult. I'm surprised that you think they were going to be coming up, but this is an oddball choice. A lot of people wouldn't have these guys this high, but I've written like 5 Blue Oyster Cult related books. I love this band to death. And I want to put them here because in the 70s, people revere that whole black and white period. So they've got an album in, I think it's 72, 73, 74, double live album in 75, the big album Agents of Fortune 76 with Don't Fear the Reaper, where they each individually get sent home with little rudimentary 4-track recorders. So they're starting to write very separately now. So the band's sound changes a lot. Then they do Spectres, which I think is one of their greatest albums of all time. And I think I've often put this as my favorite Blue Oyster Cult album. A lot of people don't like it because it's too poppy, but I think it's the one where they get the best sound. Oddly, out of Tom Werman, who doesn't generally do good productions, but on this he gets just a absolutely luscious, big, lots of highs, lots of lows. And then actually this is 79. So after this, they even get better in the 80s. I think many people will consider Cultosaurus Erectus or Fire of Unknown Origin the greatest albums they ever did. And I won't argue with that either. But prolific band in the 70s. I love that it was very unpredictable. They could write in all sorts of directions. They were very brave about that. They didn't care if something was incredibly poppy, like a Debbie Denise or Going Through the Motions. And they would do some really good heavy rock. But what I've always loved about that band is I've always put them in my 3 favorite lyricists of all time, which are the army of writers who write for Blue Oyster Cult, Captain Beefheart and Pi Dubois, who writes for Kim Mitchell and Max Webster, right? But the Blue Oyster Cult lyrics, the lyrical canon for any an American band, yes, because one of those is Canadian, one is a quote unquote solo artist. So they are my favorite American lyricists of all time. Those lyrics are just so fascinating. That's why I've done 2 really weird Imaginos related books. But yeah, just really interesting, all over the place songwriting. The critics loved them because they were cerebral and weird and unpredictable. So they're quirky enough and sophisticated enough. They're very downtown New York kind of a band, especially when it comes to the lyrics, with Patti Smith and Alan Lanier and Richard Meltzer and Helen Wheels and all these people, right? Sandy Pearlman and that whole thing. So yeah, I have no problem putting them at number 2 for second greatest American band of all time.
Yeah,
Oh,
I was. This is a band. It's just almost like the classic reaction that I was trying to find this Van Halen track, and I thought it was on Secret Treaties, and so I bought Secret Treaties and I put it on, waiting for Ice Cream Man to come on. This I was very young when this happened, and I decided it was terrible because it wasn't on this album, and I chucked it in the corner.
that
And
is a
then
very weird story.
yeah, it really was like I hate Blue Oyster Cult because I loved, I'd heard Don't Fear the Reaper and Godzilla. I loved all that stuff. Then when I was doing the channel, I decided to go, critically acclaimed albums that are rubbish. And I decided to put Secret Treaties on with my memory of it. I thought, I don't know what anyone would like this. So I put it back on now, and I put it on. And I was like, oh my God, this is ahead of its time. This is like rock. This is ahead of its time. It's got like new wave in the front, bits of punk, but it's got bits of classic rock, bits of this, bits of that. Incredible songwriting. It's strange. It's weird. And I realised I'd so totally got it wrong, and I wish I'd had a bit more of an open mind to explore those albums because they unlike Aerosmith, there's just so many great Blue Oyster Cult albums. So yes, I think without a doubt, if you said that they were the greatest American rock band that can compete against the sort of thing that British rock bands do, the more conceptual.
Well, you know what? I mean, on this list, they are a band that you can at least compare stylistically with some of those British bands, as you can Aerosmith somewhat, right? Because with Aerosmith, you get Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, the Faces, right? But all the rest of them, no. But yeah, Blue Oyster Cult almost feels like a band that sits in that place with
without being like copying British, they're definitely full on American, without a doubt. Yeah, brilliant. So who's number one then?
Well, I think we all know because we kind of agree on this somewhat. I went with ZZ Top, right? So there's a Tush 45. So ZZ Top, I just feel again brilliant right off the start, but very British, right? Very British blues boom kind of a band,
power
right?
trio,
evolved past
better. Let's be honest, better. That's the thing.
Yes, exactly. Better.
They're
but,
better.
Later too, Zeppelin's starting in 69. By the time ZZ Top comes out, Zeppelin's got 3 albums out or something. So we can't really fault them for that, but better. Yes, better, way better than Cream. Like Cream is overrated, right? But so they arrive and they've got that going for them, and the productions are actually pretty good right off the start. So you've got the first ZZ Top album, it's called, then you've got Rio Grande Mud, and then you've got Tres Hombres, which is a classic with all sorts of bangers. Then you've got the Problematic album with a crappy half side live, but the studio side,
the best stuff ever. Yeah,
best they ever did.
Yeah,
and Tejas is my favorite album they ever did, and they changed their sound. They go with the I did a episode called They Shrunk the Boogie, right? So this is when ZZ Top sounds like they're playing in a matchbox, and it's a beautiful, cool, interesting small sound they come up with on Tejas. And then they repeat that small sound. They take this long break because they have this they're very burnt out. Dusty even goes and works at the airport as a baggage guy. And then Billy goes off to Europe and stuff, and Frank kind of cleans up, but they have this long break. They get away from London Records. They come back. They're on Warner. They do DeGueo as the last album of the 70s. Everybody loves DeGueo. It's a big hit. It's got Cheap Sunglasses on it. I Thank You. All these great songs, right?
Nice album.
But yeah, what we love about, I know what you love about ZZ Top. You've raved, and I agree. Billy Gibbons is one of my top 3 guitarists of all time. Just love the guy to death. They've got these great 2 lead singers. They got humor. I remember doing a podcast episode as well, because I always like this idea of what bands went and made the blues interesting. Or if you want to be more controversial, interesting for white boys, right? Kind of thing, right? This idea that Foghat, ZZ Top, Pat Travers, Status Quo, later on Clutch, earlier on Led Zeppelin, Free, Bad Company, who took the blues and like made it a commercial thing for the jean jacket army of the Rust Belt, right? Of the young metalhead kids going to these shows, right? And ZZ Top are a perfect example of that, where it's like they're coming from that blues base, but they do so many other things well, including hard rock / heavy metal, and the humor and the 2 singers, and just this absolutely lyrical, super interesting guitarist in Billy Gibbons. So yeah, ZZ Top. I look at this entire list and honestly, well, if we allow Van Halen in, I almost really would flip Van Halen and Blue Oyster Cult and put ZZ Top and Van Halen 1-2 as the only bands that really I think the world thinks could hang with the British bands.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm so chuffed because I don't know that much about it, and you really are the expert. Because the whole reason why I did that video is because I was sat at home and I thought nothing really compared to ZZ Top. They're not like the British bands, but they go weird. I mean, they can go really weird if they want. They can go really funny, really serious. They write lyrical songs, slow songs. They do the whole thing. But they do it in their own terms. They're also incredibly iconic as a band. They're incredible players. There's more than just the blues in there because they do tricky stuff. And then another thing which I think, watching when you've spoken to Pete Pardo about this and he puts down Eliminator, I have to say, I don't get that because is there a better rock album, not a heavy metal thrash metal, but is there any gutsy rock album better than Eliminator in 1983, 84? That's why I love them, because I heard that and I put it on.
Well, it's a beautiful thing they do, and plus it's a reinvention, and they're the only ones doing it. I mean, they do a trio of albums that sound that way. But the other reason I want to say I love ZZ Top is because the 90s albums and on are some of my favorite ZZ Top albums. When I rank my favorite ZZ Top albums, I usually have DeGueo and Tejas high, but right in there in the top 5, I got to include Rhythmine, 1997, I think. Antenna is going to be really high, and I love to death Mescalero.
I'm just checking these out now.
Okay.
Yeah, because by the time we got to the '90s, I was totally ensconced in jazz rock fusion and all my, so I wasn't listening to any of this. But going back to it, without a doubt. But
okay, I'm going to do that one more time. I told you to go listen.
Yeah, I want to know which one. I want to hear a new one.
Go listen to the Rhythmine album. It will blow your mind, and you, as a virtuoso drummer, you will love the drumming because it's not Frank Beard. It's Greg Morrow drumming on that album, and the drumming is absolutely going to floor you. It is there's a straight blues on there that has the greatest blues drumming I've ever heard, called, I think it's Vincent Price Blues, but it's heavy. That album, Andy, has got one of the great drum performances of all time all across it. The production is absolutely to die for, and I think it's Billy Gibbons' best album as a guitarist. So go play Rhythmine.
Yeah,
just do that one.
I love his guitar playing so much. I'm not a massive fan of blues bass guitarists. I love Buddy Guy and Freddie King. I love all that, but especially when white people start playing the blues in that period. But Billy Gibbons, it's that Texas thing. That Texas thing fills in, I think. So yeah, I think we're totally right. But there are a couple of bands I thought I expected to have on the list that we haven't had.
Okay.
So
I gotta check a name here. Just make sure I always hesitate when I say it's name. Yes. Okay. Yeah, it is Greg Morrow. I keep always thinking of, because there's also this weird thing that goes on with this Greg Morrow guy. He also drums beautifully on some Kim Mitchell albums, and then ZZ Top's also always mixed in with this Joe Hardy as a producer thing too, right? And those two kind of go as a package. So I sometimes I'm getting old, but anyways, tell me who else you got?
Lynyrd Skynyrd.
Yeah, they're on my list here as well as a honorable mention for sure.
Yeah, because for me,
I'm just not a massive fan. I always consider them a little overrated. I don't like any of those productions. I don't like that they're a 3 guitar army that sounds like about 1 1/4 guitar.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, and I like the later stuff better. I like the Walmart Southern rock of the recent albums more, because they're a little heavier. Just the same way I like modern Molly Hatchet more than old Molly Hatchet. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's like. Freebird is like pretty close to Stairway to Heaven in terms of rock, top rock anthem type songs, and there's not many by American bands. I always felt that it's the first two albums I like, and then the live album, that was the after that I didn't like them so much. I think the first album's great for its time, but it's interesting that you say they're overrated. Here in the UK, they were a band that did reach the UK, but I think it's because we do like that southern rock thing because it's very American. But what about 38 Special or Black Oak Arkansas?
No, absolutely not. Yeah. I mean, my honorable mention in order when I laid this out, Pops. So I had the next one, I had the Tubes. The next one I had Alice Cooper. Then I had Lynyrd Skynyrd. Then I had Journey, Cheap Trick, Asterix by Frank Zappa, Styx, Asterix by Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, Kansas, The Doors, although they're a 60s band, so I had an Asterix there. Allman Brothers, grudgingly, I put the Eagles in, and MC5 in the Stooges. MC5, so that was my list, right? So Alice Cooper was a tough one to leave out. I mean, that's a band.
Right? It is a band, and it is. I think as long as the band's relatively stable as a lineup, then it's a band, isn't it? If it's somebody just bringing session musicians, that's the sort of. What about one of the greatest American rock albums of all time, which is the first Montrose album?
Well, yes, I thought of Montrose, and if we were talking albums, it might even make my top 10. But this is a band that the second album was a big drop, Paper Money, and Sammy's gone, and they put out Warner Brothers Presents, which is pretty good, and then Jump on It. So they had 4 albums, and then they broke up.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. But that first one is really up there, isn't it? That challenges the stuff that's going on in the UK.
I call it the first American heavy metal album. Basically.
I think that's right. Yeah, we were on the same page. I do feel very pleased because I do respect your knowledge. You see, and I'm at the end of mine. One more, Boston, especially with
Boston's pretty. But only 2 albums. They deserve to be up there on the strength of just 2 albums. And the second album is really the first album, part 2, but it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. So you could almost put them up there, but I guess they fell off my list because all I can think of is them in those leisure suits of theirs. Kind of thing, right? It's just the way they dress kind of knocked them off this list. Same with Styx.
So why do you think it is that where the US really invents all this? It all comes from there. Why weren't they able to produce at least one band? I mean, they do it in the 80s. Metallica is without doubt one of the preeminent rock band of the 1980s, But why couldn't they do it in the 70s? Why do you think
it's always been a big mystery to me, from a hard rock or heavy metal point of view. I'm like a scholar of some sort of this who invented heavy metal thing. And I've got that big book called that, right? Yeah. But the thing that always bothered me is yes, it almost seemed like, America starts it. British takes over the British blues boom. They do well with it in the very late 60s and early 70s. But then all of a sudden they invent heavy metal, and America seems to have this fallow period in the early 70s where they're having like a British blues boom hangover with like your Mountain and your Cactuses, and Blue Cheer kind of goes off nowhere. MC5, they have nothing. They have nothing going on, right? It's almost like this whole thing we're talking about, America versus Britain. A microcosm of that is, have you ever noticed how New York City punches way below weight when it comes to turning in great rock bands, right? There's very little we think about from New York City, right? So it's funny. So New York City is almost like the small version of America with this problem, right? But why it is, I don't really know. There is just this incredible dominance of Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, Uriah Heep, Deep Purple, through that early 70s period, 70 to 75. Yeah. And then we've got these great bands coming on. Thin Lizzy hits their stride, UFO hits their stride, Rainbow arrives, Judas Priest. So all of a sudden we're actually even more excited about these bands there. So, as I might have mentioned last time, and we've talked about when we did the Metal Evolution episode.
But we've got bands like Budgie and Nazareth. We could just, I'm just off the top of my head, I'm thinking that all those just sort of, even those bands are trumping a lot of what we've talked about. Budgie are hell of a talk about power trios.
For the record, why don't we Beatles, Queen, Genesis, yes. Jethro Tull, King
Yeah.
Crimson, right? We didn't even talk about any of that, right?
No,
look at how-
but there's, and I'm thinking even bands I don't listen to, but I know they're there. You know, it is really interesting. You know what I think it is? This might sound mad. I think it's Black Sabbath because they're all doing their thing, but Black Sabbath are so unique in what they do in 69, 70, and the walk up to Sabotage is such they never drop the bat, even though there's all the drug issues and management issues and all this stuff's going on. And I think it's because what's probably Americans don't get, and unless they watch the Osbournes, which I suppose they did because we all saw the Osbournes, is that band are incredibly sophisticated. There's a magical chemistry, but they really are the down to earth. You know, that thing that heavy metal has that we all loved, that, you know, we weren't going to be into the intellectual bands because we were heavy metalers, and it was just like that aspect's very heavy, very humble. That aspect is Black Sabbath just embody. You have to come from Birmingham to have it. You know.
Yeah, very
I think
cool.
that, and I think that really is what it is. I think there's a magic to that band, and the older I get, I keep thinking Black Sabbath are the greatest band of all time.
Yeah, I know. And I the more I think of it over the years too, as I have no tolerance for this, Led Zeppelin is more sophisticated than Black Sabbath stuff. I just think Black Sabbath album to album match up those 8 versus that 8.
Yeah.
And Black Sabbath is almost like routinely being more creative than Led Zeppelin is. And I don't care that they don't do a whole pile of folk or something like that, or they have no blues. You know, I mean, what's the big deal of doing folk and blues? I mean, both of those were around in the 60s already.
But when they do go, they have that moment, and they have it on Paranoid. They get there at the same time when Led Zeppelin 3 is going on. They're doing Planet Caravan, and Planet Caravan sounds like something that's like 20 years in the future. When all those triplet hot bands like Portishead came out, I thought, well, it's Planet Caravan, isn't it? And then Changes, which is the sound of Changes and how beautiful that is as a tune. So unlike Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin never wrote as good a tune as Changes. You know, all of my love is probably the equivalent of that, which is later. There's all sorts of experimentation, and they never drop it. And I just think that people, they don't appreciate. People don't quite get that this guy. They invented a genre. They invented like a image. They brought like horror into it. There's so much there that they did that is so much more groundbreaking than the Beatles. There's a million more bands.
Yeah. You know, the other thing, I get fed up because sometimes I think, you know, I don't know if I've ever said this before, but, you know, they'll do 3 things late into a 5.5, 6 minute song that if they were on a Zeppelin album, people would say, oh, this is the greatest moment, magic moments that Led Zeppelin ever did, sort of thing. I used to say that. You know who else I say that about? Nick Drake as an acoustic guitarist.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's like you line up all the great Nick Drake moments on acoustic guitar across those 3 albums and rank them against all of Jimmy Page's greatest acoustic guitar moments. And it's like Jimmy will start showing up at number 9, number 17, number 31, right? You know, and the rest will all be Nick Drake.
Without a doubt, yeah. And also, we did plan to talk about these albums, but I haven't had a chance to really get back into them. Is that all that stuff that people say they didn't do? They did do on Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die. Those albums aren't bad because Ozzy was off his head. They're not because they don't sound like that. They're very in control. There's all sorts of different ideas on, and then on top of that, I know a lot of people that believe the greatest heavy metal album of all time is Heaven and Hell. There's a whole army of people that think those two and Mob Rules to a certain extent as well are incredible. I had the Live Evil double album. So as we start to go, that was one of my favorite rock double albums. It was brilliant because of the songs that are on there. I mean, you know, at that point, what they got to pick from, you know, and so that's.
Well, I'm not going to comment on those last 2 Aussies because I want us still to do that.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get deep into it. I think I just got to get a chance to do that. But Martin, I've enjoyed that very much. I think this is going to be a pretty important video on my channel because we've really gone through those American bands and put that to bed. And I hope we've shown some of the brilliant American bands that are out there, but also shown up the reason why I am such a proud Englishman and keep championing our brilliant British bands. You know, even though you invented it all, I have to give you it. But, well, not you, but people on your side of the Atlantic. Anyway, lovely to speak to you. I'm going to finish off now, so please, put a like on, subscribe, all that type of thing. I think Martin's going to become a regular now. He's got to nag me, So if you think of something, we'll do it. You could choose the next one.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay. Then. See you soon.
All right. Thanks again,
Bye.
Andy.
Bye.